Hi guys, I want to talk about the next strategy for African development. It's called application of political conditionality. Now, structural adjustment had, as a strategy for African development, had imposed a lot of hardships on the people, the ordinary people, the citizenry, and it had also led to several attempted coups. Some places there were coups, some places there were attempted coups. There had been social and political backlash as a result of the implementation of the SAP, and we are told that it introduced in Africa more challenges than, if you like, benefits to many African countries. It was later, through the reviews of the implementation of the SAP as strategy for development, it was realized that in certain countries SAP worked very well, but in other countries, especially in many African countries, SAP was not working very well. But through the reviews and research, it came out that it appears that in many of the countries that SAP was working very well, these countries were also democratic. And in other countries that the structural adjustment program wasn't working well, they were also not democratic. And so the application of political conditionality was also introduced as a strategy for development, and that if you want more external assistance from the World Bank and the Bretton Woods institutions, then you should democratize. Of course, some pro-democracy forces within Africa, within countries in Africa, had advocated for the end of military rule and then the return of the constitutional democratic rule. In Ghana, you can talk about the work of pro-democracy forces like Ghana Bar Association and several civil society identifiable groups that had demanded that Rawlings end his 11 years of PNDC rule and to return the country into multi-party democratic, governance and all that. But so that was the local demand, but the local demand coupled with the demand from the Bretton Woods institutions that, look, henceforth, if you need more assistance, then you have to democratize, compelled Rawlings and many African country leaders to think about democratizing. And the idea was that then if you democratize, you would have some development. Well, if you look at the features of democracy, these features should really inch a country closer to development. So we are talking about respect for human rights. Okay, if rights are respected, people are allowed to ventilate, air their grievances, and when things are not going on well, they are able to keep the government on its toes and they speak their mind without fear or favor. You are talking about independent judiciary, you are talking about independent civil society, independent electoral commission, independent parliament, and so many other features which are found in democratic government, the conduct of free, fair, peaceful, and transparent periodic elections. If you look at all these features, if a country is able to achieve them, if a country is able to ensure transparency and accountability in its governance, if a regime knows that, look, you will not remain in power in perpetuity, and if you govern and you don't govern well, you may be changed in the next election. I mean, these things tend to keep the government or the regime on its toes to ensure that it delivers to satisfy the developmental needs of its people. And so there was this cliche or demand that if African countries would democratize, then there will be some development. And so all African countries, initially, they objected, but they had no choice because it was tied as a condition for the securing of aid. And so that's how come many of them had to democratize. In Ghana, for instance, Rawlings, who was a soldier, had to abandon or take off his military uniform and to organize an elections in which he was described as the referee, the linesman, the footballer, and the coach. So he held elections in Ghana in 1992. We drafted the 1992 Constitution, the ban on multi-party activism or activities got lifted, so we had multi-parties coming up to campaign and all that. In 1992 elections, Rawlings won, and the same applies to other African countries where they held elections, and some leaders were defeated, but many of them also they knew how to. It was the first time in so many years, and so elections were held, but not necessarily free, fair, peaceful, and transparent. But the point of the real crux of the matter is whether it is true that democratizing or a country applying this political conditionality is enough to make it develop. You would see that many of the countries that were making the demands on Africa that we must democratize to bring about development, they themselves did not start as democracies. Some of them, or many of them, started as dictatorships. They applied, or they were under dictatorial or authoritarian regimes for up to some time. They were under authoritarian regimes and had made a lot of economic advancements and progress to a certain level because before they introduced democracy as a form of luxurious system of government. But here is the case: they were demanding that Africa that was not developed at the time must implement democracy, as if to say that the implementation of democracy would automatically translate into development. As I said, if the features are properly implemented, then we may get closer to development, but it is not automatic, because, like I said, first of all, many countries started as not democracies, but they developed first. The fiscal quality of human life got improved before they introduced democracy. But again, there are several evidence to also show countries that are democratic and they are developed, and countries that are democratic and not developed. There are so many countries that do not believe in democracy, but they are developed. And there are so many countries that believe in democracy and they are poor. And so the correlation or the relationship between democracy and development is not that straightforward like that. You can be democratic and develop, and you can be under-democratic, you can be non-democratic and still be developed. And then you can be democratic and be underdeveloped. And so, as you soon find out in the literature that I have made available, when you read, you can see the histories of many countries that are developed today, and you see how they started. And you also have empirical evidence of examples of countries that are very democratic and where fiscal quality of human life is very low, and people live in abject poverty and underdevelopment. And so for me, democracy is good, is the most preferred form of government, but sometimes it can lead to development, sometimes it cannot lead to development. But if you look at the countries that are democratic and they are developed, and countries that are undemocratic and they are developed, there are a few features that are common between them. First of all, in these countries, institutions work. Secondly, in these countries, they have good leadership. Thirdly, in these countries, the state itself is developmental in focus. And then also they have a certain kind of politicking that they play that pushes the agenda of development. And so whether a country is democratic or not democratic would not matter for development as far as I'm concerned. What is important is the nature of the politics that they play, whether the state is developmental in focus, whether institutions are strong, and whether they are led by leaders, not presidents. Whether they are led by leaders, not managers. For me, these are the core issues. If you read the work of Leftwich and Co., you find more about this. And so let me conclude by saying that democracy is good, but its relationship with development is not as straightforward. Sometimes it brings about development, sometimes it may not bring about development. But what is important for a country that is willing to fight hard to extricate itself from the quagmires of poverty and underdevelopment is to look at how developmental the state is, how strengthened each institutions are, and whether it has the kind of politicking that promotes development, not patron-client relations, not new patrimonial politics, not the winner takes all politics, but a kind of politics that focuses at bringing about development. And then also, like I said, whether it is actually led by a true leader and not somebody who parades himself or herself as a president and is a simple manager who is unable to inspire confidence in the people and influence them such that they are willing to give him or her enthusiastic cooperation for him or her to achieve a predetermined goal that may have been set for the state. And so basically, I will draw the curtains down on this particular lecture and move to the next strategy for African development. Thank you.